It would appear that David is now king of all the people, but there still had to be a reconciliation. It couldn't just be assumed. You don't go from being an abject enemy of somebody to all of a sudden just assuming that everything's okay and we're going to skip through this world. Now, I want us to picture, we kind of read this, I read this, kind of the monotone, the way that we normally read Scripture, but I think there's some intensity in this. I think there's some tension. Picture these elders coming up. David is known to be a great warrior. David is called by God. David is all of these things. And all of a sudden these elders are coming up and they're bowing before David. They're saying, okay, we will recognize you as king, as our king, but here's the deal. We have to make this case, this plea. And in a really neat way then, it says David then made a covenant with them. In other words, the reconciliation was done. An agreement was made. There was a relationship. Now, I think in the past, we've talked before about maybe the difference between a contract and a covenant. There's a difference between a contract and a covenant. When I bought my pickup that's in the parking lot, I signed a contract. And what made that a contract is it's just a legally binding agreement between two parties. I will do this and you will do that and we're going to get along great and we'll leave this place. But it's different when we talk about a covenant. A covenant is different. A covenant is an agreement for sure. There are stipulations. There are, hey, this is what I'm providing, and this is what I'm providing. And in a covenant, that's one of the differences in and of itself. In a contract, it's saying you sign that paper and you're telling me you're going to provide me this. In a covenant, it's saying I'm going to provide you this. It's absolutely flipped on its head. I'm going to provide. This is what I'm going to do. But the big thing between the difference between a covenant and a contract is in a covenant, there is a deep relationship that forms. It's not just an impartial thing. Natalie and I, in our marriage, before God and before others, we have a covenant, not a contract. And that's maybe part of the problem with marriages today. People see them as contracts, when in all reality, God has called us to oneness in our marriages in a covenant. Do we always live it out? No. Especially if Natalie were here. She'd probably have a lot to say on that. We don't always live it out perfectly, but that's where grace and God's mercy comes in. So David here takes these people in, hears their plea, their argument, and then makes a covenant with them, in a sense, bringing reconciliation. So one of the things that I believe that shows us in a powerful way is David's incredible mercy. These were people that thrust me out into the desert, and I lived in caves. I went from Saul's palace to living in the desert. With 300, 400 ragtag guys, even living in the land of the enemy in order just to stay alive. Just to keep this into perspective a little bit, David was anointed at 15. And the passage today says he finally became king of all God's people at age 30. So if we do the math, he spent 15 years in the desert. And then all of a sudden spending 15 years in the desert, in part because of these elders, then all of a sudden he comes and these elders submit to them. And what was his response? His response was, let's make a covenant together. I'm called to lead all of God's people. It shows his amazing mercy. Now, when we talk about how that practically applies to you and I, does that not reflect exactly the posture of Jesus Christ towards his people today? I want to read Ephesians chapter 2, verses 4 and 5. But because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ even when we were dead in transgressions. It is by grace that you have been saved.